This is the Microsoft Cloud Show, episode 114. CJ and I are going to talk about C Clouds, Yammer, free onboarding for Office 365, quarterly results from Microsoft and Amazon, and Docker Cloud goes GA. Recorded live February the 11th, 2016.
Welcome to the Microsoft Cloud Show, the only place to stay up to date on everything going on in the Microsoft Cloud world, including Windows Azure, Office 365, SharePoint, Exchange, Lync, and related technologies. Just the information, no marketing, no BS. I'm Andrew Connell.
And I'm Chris Johnson.
And we're just two dudes telling you how we see it.
Good morning, CJ. How's it going?
Very well, my friend. Very well. How about you?
It's going good. So I will first, before we dive into doing a kind of banter here, we want to apologize to everybody. We know we missed an episode last week. We technically didn't miss the episode, but you didn't want it because we won't say who, but one of the two of us, our recording got really screwed up and it was jumping around.
Yeah, that might have been me. That might have been me.
So, and when we did not notice it or it didn't, everything sounded fine. But if you listen to the whole episode, you'd hear things like jumping around. And so we didn't find out about it until literally the morning the episode was supposed to get published. So this is episode 114. I'm going to call this episode 114 part 2.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a do-over, but hopefully this one will work out better than the last. So we'll see. The
good thing is we already have a show planned out and everything for this one because we had all the same news. So
yeah.
At any rate, what have you been up to lately?
Oh my goodness, all sorts. Driving towards end of the current sprint that we're on, and we're heads down and bum up in code. So it's going really well, but it's. We're building enough breadth to our application now that we're having to start about big boy topics like scaling and things like that. So yeah, it's fun, super fun. How about you?
Awesome. I am in the final throes of building out content for a class I'm working on for Microsoft that I'm in the studio for next week to record. And at the same time, I'm doing everything I can to avoid the flu. My son had the flu Saturday through Tuesday earlier this week. My wife came down with it on Tuesday. She's still sporting a fever of 102. Daughter doesn't have it, but I'm the only one so far that got the flu shot. And I'm the only one that feels fine so far. So I'm crossing my fingers because I'm also supposed to run a half marathon race this weekend. So.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, it's one of those dodge the bullet things.
Oh yeah, there's Clorox. We should be buying stock in Clorox right now because it's just we're wiping everything down and everybody's staying away. I'm living in the guest bedroom. I'm like my wife. I just told my wife, I'm like, you just keep our bedroom. I'm moving out. Yeah. Stay away from the office. But yeah, it's all good. It's so far so good. At least so far so good that we're containing it. But of course, my wife and my son, they took the beating. But at any rate.
I hope it all works out.
Yeah, me too. Hey, so you want to dive into some news?
Yes. We've got some interesting articles, and then we're going to get into a cool topic this week.
Awesome. So a couple things we wanted to touch on here. I know some of this stuff might be older news, but again, we talked about it in our show that we had to throw out last week. So first one is we call it C Clouds. And we have an article that we flipped in our Flipboard that is a Microsoft research project. And what Microsoft did is they took a container, this cylinder container, and they put a rack of servers or two in the container, and it was tethered, and they dropped it about a half mile off the coast in the Pacific Ocean, off the coast of the United States, and had a tether with feed and data and everything going to and from it, and even had some Azure workloads were running off of that container for a little bit. So they pulled the container back up to go check on it and do a bunch of stuff on it. Now they're doing a bunch of analysis, and it's kind of a proof of concept. And hey, is this an option? How could this, is this a feasible option? Just one of those, hey, we got a ton of money in the bank. Let's try something. Let's see what this does.
Let's do something funky. Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah.
Go stick a data center off the coast. Lots of cooling.
Yeah, exactly.
Power might be a little bit of a problem, and same with getting internet to it. But yeah, I mean, lots of space down there.
That's probably why it was only a half mile off the coast.
Yeah, I think 75% of the world is covered in ocean or something. So there's plenty of room.
Yeah, plenty of room. Plenty of room. So, you want to talk a little bit about Yammer?
Yeah, so Mr. Yammer's dying in my yearly predictions. Microsoft are turning it on by default.
Oh.
Yep, I can hear the million groans around the world on this one. Microsoft are turning on Yammer by default in all Office 365 subscriptions. So you have to go turn it off, I think, as opposed to currently you have to go turn it on. But this seems to be all in aid of combating Facebook at Work, which is the new collab tool coming from Facebook soon. I believe it's in private testing at the moment, but should be coming later this year, I think. So we'll see. But yeah, I don't know. Too little, too late.
That's my take on it too. I was a little disappointed by it because, I mean, of course, the week before there was news that they cut all the people that were, what do they call them? Some sort of consumer partner kind of things. They were the team that was kind of like the public face for Yammer, and they cut all of those guys. And so it was kind of a hint that everyone was like, Yammer's dying. And the next week it's like, no, we're doubling down. It's like, oh, no, go the other way, please.
Yeah.
Sorry, personal sentiment right there. But
I know my love for Yammer is not high right now, so I'm with you.
Hey, another thing that we had was just talking real quickly about the quarterly updates from Microsoft and Amazon.
Yeah.
For this last financial quarter. Microsoft's was really good. Had some interesting numbers in there, showed that, well, some interesting in the sense that we saw, I believe it was something like the sales of Windows or PCs were down 5%. The phone was almost cut in half from the previous quarter. So it was really bad news. And actually, there was a couple articles I saw kind of circulate around too. Some of the tech rags like TechCrunch and NextWeb and those guys that even had some articles that were implying that Microsoft was going to cut their mobile phone. But I mean, that was a bit premature. But the big thing, I think, was that you saw the significant growth again of Office 365, and their entire cloud business was up in a very big way. I think it was something like 70%.
Yeah.
It was up like 70%. And they had 20 million consumer licenses or something like that, or consumer seats.
Yeah, 20 million consumer 365 licenses. That's one of the things that kind of gets lost in the news articles. They say, like, a lot of I think I saw TechCrunch or something said Office 365 is now up to 20 million users or something. And that's BS. It's 20 million consumer subscriptions of Office 365. So there's consumer and there's commercial. Commercial's all the business, and that's significantly larger than that consumer number. I think the last number that Satya talked about was over 60 million seats, monthly active users of commercial seats. So, yeah, it's important, that differentiation.
Yeah. The other one that came out a day or so later was Amazon's. And it was interesting because I know when we talked about this in the show we had to toss, we were both saying how interesting it was in the sense that it's two separate sides of this business. You've got the consumer side of the business, which is Amazon.com, that so many people are familiar with, which just doesn't look like it's making any money, it is operating at a razor thin margin. Shipping costs were dramatically high over the last quarter. They did do a significantly better in the fourth quarter for sales than they had in previous quarters, including previous fourth quarters, which is, I mean, that fourth quarter is their big time when around the Christmas and Thanksgiving and holiday season, but
yeah,
still it just wasn't good. But their cloud business was sky high yet again. Amazon took it on the chin quite a bit in the stock market when they had these quarterly results came out, and it's so funny too because Amazon said previously their guidance was something like revenues would be anywhere from like 33 billion to 36 billion, something like that. And the street was expecting much higher numbers. But when Amazon came in, they were at the high end of their own range of like 35 and a half or something like that, really close to their high end of the range. But the street's like, yeah, but we expect you to do better, so we're going to beat you up about it.
Right.
It's just so funny. Like watching, I know this in real time. We're watching the same thing with Tesla that happened yesterday. They got beaten up yesterday bad. And then they had a quarterly result that shows significantly more losses than they had in previous quarters, but the demand is just going through the roof.
Yeah.
They actually have operating cash flow. And so now today they're up like 14 or 15%. So go figure.
Yeah. Who knows? Stock market, hey?
Yeah.
Hey, I've got an interesting one.
Go for it.
Office 365 is now giving small and medium businesses access to its Fast Track program, which is an onboarding concierge service. So this has only been available for customers over 150 seats or more, but the Fast Track program gives basically it gives dedicated people to help you onboard to Office 365, and so that could be assisting you with, say, like getting your mail moved and stuff like that. Now they're offering it to small and medium businesses from 50 to 149 seats as well. So this is great for small businesses on the small business plans at 365. So if you're on Google Apps or some other hokey system for mail and stuff like that, you can get some assistance from Microsoft to help you move.
Awesome.
For free. So it comes bundled with the plan. It's part of it's basically one of the features of the service now, which is pretty cool.
Hokey email service. You're referring to like AOL or CompuServe or something like that?
Yeah, or some like SMTP pop box you've got underneath your desk or something.
Very nice. Hey, the last bit of news we were going to cover here is something that was announced in the last 2 or 3 days of recording here. And I know it's something called Docker Cloud. Do you want to talk a little bit about what this is?
Yeah, so Docker Cloud has gone GA, which it's a new product that Docker actually acquired last year, I think September-ish, maybe August or September timeframe. They acquired a company called Tutum, Tutum, which we've spoken about on the show before. But real quickly, what it does is it gives you the ability to run a Docker cluster, so a set of virtual machines for running your Docker containers on, and it's sort of platform agnostic, so you can run them in AWS or in Azure or in DigitalOcean, places like that, and it gives you sort of a management layer across your nodes in those locations. So Docker bought them and have now moved its branding and things like that to what's now called Docker Cloud. So you can go check it out at cloud.docker.com. And basically it's that same management layer. For 2 cents an hour, they'll manage each of your Docker nodes. And it basically is a bunch of features for helping you manage, deploy, run your containers in a Docker cluster up in the cloud. So they're offering it now as like a first-party experience from Docker, which is really cool. We've been using it a lot at Hyperfish, and it is a very, very cool service and application. It makes life managing those things so much easier. And unless you've got a dedicated DevOps person who's doing a ton of scripting and building and things like that, you can't really do it yourself at scale without a lot of work. So it's a cool little app. Oh, I shouldn't say little. It's a great app. It's really helping us deploy and manage our Docker containers in Azure.
Very cool.
I suspect it's going to sort of conflict with what Azure are doing with the Azure Container Service in some regards at some point, some of the same sort of features, but it's pretty nice that it's cloud agnostic, so you can do it across Amazon or Azure or whatever you want.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear. We have an episode we're going to do coming up pretty soon about the Azure Container Service, and we got somebody who's deep in it right now with Microsoft, who you might have seen presented at like the Azure conference or at Build. You've seen him talk about it. So we're going to interview him in a few weeks and have that up on the show coming up pretty soon. So be interesting to talk to him about it and see what he thinks is this a competitor, just another option, et cetera. So
yeah, absolutely.
Or is it just one of those things that if you want X, then we can do X. Otherwise, if you want Y, that thing does Y. We don't do Y.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm sure there'll be some sort of overlap of the Venn diagram.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So hey, meat of the show here. You want to talk about a little bit about Azure ARM?
Yes. So have you been bodybuilding or something? Like what are you talking about, Willis?
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview. I have been spending a bunch of time with this recently, and it's incredibly impressive. So let's just let me explain what this is, and then let's take a little bit of a history lesson. So what this is that ARM is Azure Resource Manager. So it's referred to as the Azure Resource Manager or ARM setup. There are 2 different ways for deploying things in Azure. One of them is called the Azure Service Manager, and one of them is called the Azure Resource Manager. So I'm not going to get too much into the details about what each one does and why one is better over the other one. Let me just cut to the chase, and then we'll kind of explain where we are. So the idea is that anything that you build or anything that you create, any resources you create inside of Azure today, you should be doing stuff using ARM. Now, you might have seen things like when you go to create a virtual machine in the last few months on Azure, you've seen a classic mode or a V1, and then you've seen a V2 style virtual machine.
Yeah.
So the classic or the V1, that's referred to as the Azure Service Manager, or the ASM model. The V2 model is the ARM model. Now, you're also, those of you who are out there, are also familiar probably with the two different Azure portals we have. We have the old portal, which was we call it the Azure Management Portal, which that was at manage.windowsazure.com. That was the one that had all those tiles going down the left-hand side, and then it was mostly a white and blue experience. And then you have another portal, which went GA in the last 2 months, we used to refer to as the preview portal, or some people may be familiar with its code name called Ibiza. It's at portal.azure.com. So anything that is in portal.azure.com, the current portal, the one that by default is like black or blue and uses that blade interface.
Yeah.
Anything that's in there supports ARM, the ARM model of deployments and provisioning. If it's not there, but it's in the old portal, the manage.windowsazure.com, for instance, Azure Active Directory, that's one that does not support ARM yet. Anything that's new, any new services must support ARM, and that's where they're going to go is in the new portal. And that's why you see two portals that are still live today and we haven't fully transitioned from one to the other, is because
painful.
Yeah, some of these underlying services aren't updated yet. But I think we're down to only like 3 services that are not in the current portal that are still in the old one.
Yeah, but I struck like little weird things. Like I couldn't find where to upload new management certs in the new portal. I don't know if that exists, but it seems to be like there's some services missing, like a low number, but also some functionality as well from the old portal. Like I had to jump back to the old portal to go upload a management cert because I couldn't find where to do it in the new one. Or if it even exists. I
had to jump back to the old one to download an invoice to be able to look at my Azure invoice to see usage and stuff. So I've been diving this API I'm dealing with. This other project deals with partners and having to understand how things are billed in Azure. It is not nearly as simple as you look at a VM and it says 9 cents an hour. It's actually and it's not that they're overcomplicating. It's a complicated problem. But at any rate, So here's the thing. With ARM, what ARM is going to allow you to do is it makes the deployments much more of a templated option. It makes things significantly easier to maintain. And so we have this concept of a thing called a resource group. One of the things that we can do with these ARM templates is that we can create a JSON document that explains what we want to create, what's going to be provisioned. You can almost think of it as like a project plan. So this JSON document is going to have a multitude of things. Really, it's going to break down into 3 different sections. One of them is going to be all of the different assets. So, for example, let's say I just wanted to deploy a virtual machine. I could have one template that it's going to create a virtual machine, but a virtual machine is not just one asset that can run in Azure. It actually has some dependent resources that it needs. For example, you have to have a virtual hard disk, and that virtual hard disk has to live somewhere, so it's going to be in a storage blob. You have to have a virtual network. You may have public IPs. You may want to have a subnet. All of those different things you have to have set up. So when you create a virtual machine, that's one instance of how much that's running, but then you also have those other pieces that you have to factor in calculating your bill. I know we talked about this in previous episodes a long time ago about the cost of VMs.
So is it kind of like crafting a rubber stamp, right, to print out a set of infrastructure?
You can think about it like that, yeah. And I mean, you can even set it to where that template is not just a VM. You could have that template be a series of VMs of say I'm going to go deploy you've seen some of these things where you can say, go create a simple SharePoint farm. And it's like just a few servers and a database server and all that stuff. That's all defined in a single template that someone's built. If the high availability farm, it could be multiple servers and a single template, and they all are going to go through and leverage the same thing. Now, it's really cool because now you can take this template and you can see, how Microsoft is saying, here's how you should provision a SharePoint high availability farm. Even if you're going to do it in your own infrastructure, you can see how they've laid it out with the subnets and all the IPs and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Now, where this starts to get really interesting then is if you look at these templates, I mentioned one part of it, which is just all the different resources. The 2 other parts in this template, one is for variables, which you can just think about if you create something, you want to give it a name, and then you can be able to use it across places. So, for example, if I'm creating a SharePoint high availability farm, I want to create a subnet, and then I want to give that subnet a name and refer to it in all the other VMs and have them connected to it.
Gotcha.
You can also have parameters. So I can pass in different things. So let's take a really simple one. If I want to create like a Linux VM, an Ubuntu Linux VM, there are 3 different parameters, or actually there's 4 parameters I can pass into this template. One is the username and the password for the admin account. One is the name of the DNS, the subnet that you want to create, or the DNS name for this VM. And then the 4th one is an optional parameter that is the version of Ubuntu you want to install, or you want to use. And so what this is, you take that template, and then you can plug in those different parameters, and you can, in one of a couple different ways, you can use the raw ARM REST API to provision this item. That's using the direct API, or you can use the API in an indirect way. And there's 3 ways to do that. There is the PowerShell interface for Azure. There's an update to that just came out that you've seen, where there's different modes where if you're in PowerShell, you have to switch to the ARM mode from ASM.
Yep.
And then same thing, the Azure command line interface, the cross-platform node tool.
CLI.
The CLI. He's got an ASM and an ARM model as well. And then you also have just the website. You have the Azure portal, because what the Azure portal is doing is he's calling his own REST APIs that you can call yourself.
Gotcha.
So it's pretty slick. It's a pretty cool way to go through into template stuff, or to templatize your deployments.
Yeah, so it's kind of like you're crafting your rubber stamp for your infrastructure in kind of a declarative way, the same way you would, define something in XML, for example, or what have you. And then you use that, you upload it through a variety of means to Azure, and then you can stamp out these things. So, for example, like in my scenario, right, we're building an application that is Dockerized, but I could build an ARM template that helps stamp out my nodes or my virtual machines and the configuration of those that are going to run the Docker cluster. Mm-hmm. And so I'd build my ARM template to define what I want those virtual machines to look like and how they talk to each other and all that networking stuff from an infrastructure side. Then on the Docker side, kind of the analogy or the equivalent in Docker is what would be called a Docker Compose file, which is basically the same thing as an ARM template, except at the application level, saying I want these containers and this one needs to be able to talk to this one, and it exposes these ports and all that sort of stuff. So I could imagine people building apps, they have an ARM template for the infrastructure, and then they have maybe some sort of application definition, more at an app level to define how their application hangs together that runs on that infrastructure. But that's pretty cool because it means it's very repeatable. And one of the an interesting software lesson that anybody who's done any sort of large scale systems before, the only way to stay productive is if you can basically tear things down and build them back up really easily, right? Almost at the push of a button. And if you've done that with VMs, there's a lot of manual configuration and all that sort of stuff. But it sounds like with ARM that you could get around a lot of that by building one of these templates and rubber stamping out a set of infrastructure. So when you're on a roll a new version, you're almost like just tear the whole lot down and build it back up. It's super easy. Yeah,
it really is. It's really easy. And I mean, one of the things that you referred to was drawing an analogy with Docker and Docker Compose. And you can think of this, you're right, you can think of this the exact same way. In fact, you can almost think of it as both a combination of the Docker file and Docker Compose, because it allows you to not only spin up the resource, but it also allows you to bring multiple resources together and to have a hierarchy of how these things are going to get provisioned. And you can make it all say, I want this whole thing to provision. I want this whole bit to provision. Or I only want, and that's when everything gets provisioned, that's a successful deployment. But otherwise, I want it to be a failed deployment. So what's neat about this is that when you take that template and you send it over to the ARM APIs and you say, go provision these resources, what you can do is that you can tell it, I don't want to wait for it to finish, but let Azure go off and start doing its job, taking that template to go create everything. And then you can constantly call and say, give me the status, and even look at the logs and go through all the logs and see what's going on. And what I've found in playing with this and working on it for this one project is that when there was a failure, like when I try to provision something in Azure and there's been a failure, you don't always get detailed errors of exactly what happened. And it's kind of hard to dig into it. But with this one, like I have actually I've written a lab to show this. But what we did is we created a Linux VM. And when we created the DNS name, we actually used capital letters in the DNS name, which that's not valid. So when we submitted it to have it go provision everything, it started creating all the prerequisite resources like the storage account and allocating a public IP and all that stuff. But then when it went to create the VM with the DNS record, it failed. And it just, all it said when I asked it through the command line interface, what happened? What's the status? It says it failed. And I said, well, dump the logs. And so I looked at the logs and I started crawling through the logs. And as I'm looking through each one, I finally see there's the one that failed. And it flat out said it failed this regular expression. You look at the regular expression and there's clearly, you can't put capital letters in there.
Gotcha.
So made a change and tweaked it.
Cool. So why would anybody not do this?
You wouldn't. In fact, this is one of the reasons why when I say that you really want to focus on when you create new things in Azure, you want to use ARM. There's really no reason you want to use the ASM model, the old Azure Service Manager model, unless you have existing resources that were created as under ASM and still have to be maintained that way. Because you can't take a VM that was done as ASM and just say migrate it over to ARM, because it's a totally different underlying dependencies.
Yeah, you got to recreate it, right?
Yeah.
What about tools to help you build these things?
I'm so glad you said that. Now this gets really cool. So you're thinking about these templates, you're saying, okay, it's cool, I love the idea, but of course, when I tell you got to go build your template that's a JSON document, you're going to kind of be like, that's going to be a pain, right?
Totally.
Now, let me ask you this. Have you done this? Have you done any of this stuff before?
No, not by hand. I've always done it through the portal.
Okay. Now, so let's do something really quick, and so people can experience this, because I'm going to walk you through something that's pretty cool here. Let's say if you open up a browser and you go to azure.microsoft.com/documentation/templates. So I don't know if you have the ability to do that right now while I walk you through this.
Yeah, let me try this. What's the address again?
azure.microsoft.com/documentation/templates. So while you're doing that, what that is a list of a bunch of quick start templates. Now, these are templates that are provided by Microsoft, and there are also templates that have been provided by the community.
Oh, cool.
And the way it's done is that there is a GitHub repo that Azure maintains, where you can fork the repo, create your own template, specify some metadata about your template and the parameters it expects, and then submit it back as a pull request. And Azure will include it in their, assuming all the tests pass, it'll include it for everybody else to take a look at.
That's pretty cool.
Now it gets even better. So get this. Go do a search for, let's see, one that people would probably be familiar with. How about SharePoint? Go do a search for SharePoint. And when you do that, you'll find there's two hits that come back. So why don't you go ahead and click on the one that's the 3 VM SharePoint deployment.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you go there, that page has got an explanation of like, here are all the different parameters you can pass in and all this stuff. And at the bottom, it says, using PowerShell or using the command line, here's how to create it. But it gets this gets interesting. So if you scroll back up to the top, you'll find in the description, it says, learn more on GitHub. Mm-hmm. All right. So click on that link.
Gotcha.
Now, what that's going to do is take you the actual template. Now, this gets really cool. Scroll down to the README, and you're going to see two buttons. One is deploy to Azure, which will actually go create the template right then.
Oh, yeah.
Even better. See that visualize button?
Yeah.
Click on that puppy and check out what this is going to give you. I'm just going to get your reaction.
Holy smoke.
This is a visual representation of the template, and you can actually double-click on any of the different resources.
Nice.
And see the actual template for each thing, go through and make changes to it, save it locally, all that stuff. And you can see what the dependency graph looks like. Now, it's a little, like for this one we picked out, it's a little messy, but you can definitely read what's going on. You can see how it's all set up.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Visio diagram for infrastructure.
Exactly. And you see on the left-hand side where you have that toolbox, you can even grab one of those items and go drag one of those items onto the design surface and make changes. But it gets even better. Now go ahead, over on the left-hand side, you'll see some buttons. And if you click on Edit Parameter Definition,
oh yeah,
you'll see this huge table open up. You can then go in and fill in all the values, the different deployment values. And at the bottom, you can save those changes so that you can get your own parameter file. If you then go into one of the command line interfaces or using the REST API, you can either pass in the template and the parameter file, or you can pass in links to where you can get the template and the parameter file. And one of those links can even be pulling the raw GitHub content straight from this repository. So if you see something, if you have something that you need to create, like for me, I want to go through and create a couple of virtual machines running Ubuntu that already had Docker already installed on them.
Yeah.
The Docker engine. I went and found a couple templates that were out there, figured out which one was the one that I wanted, grabbed the URL to the template, opened up the parameter file, filled in my values so all the VMs had the same. They all were going to have the exact same username and password to log into them, but they'd have different DNS names. Saved those parameter files, and then I wrote a little script, a little batch script that called the command line interface and created a new resource group, and then created 4 VMs, giving different names to them, spun it all up, walked away, came back, ran a status on it. It showed my resource group was all created. If the resource group had any issues, I can just through the command line interface say, go get that resource group and delete it and then recreate it.
Super cool.
The amount of work that I had to do probably took about 15 minutes to figure out how I was going to do it, but it was all completely templatized. And so there was no manual steps of walking through a web interface. Now that whole process of creating my deployment can all be scripted, and we can put that in source control so that we have a nice, repeatable deployment.
Yeah, I actually heard a great story the other day about some infrastructure that went bad. And, the server had been running for like 5 or 6 years, and nobody had any documentation on how it was set up or built. And the thing died, like literally blew up, and they had to build another one, and nobody knew what to do. And there's no configuration as code, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
And that's super important in being able to, repeated builds of your infrastructure, or you do it with source code. So why wouldn't you treat your definition of your infrastructure as code, right? As important as your application code.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, in fact, when you look at some of the stuff that, when in the deployments that we've done in the past, when we manually go through and build these things, I know as a developer, one of the things that I've always hated is that having to document what the deployment looked like for the infrastructure team if you work at one of those organizations that has a strict change control process, et cetera.
Yeah.
One of the things that's nice about this is that when you build things out in a templated way like this, and you have the different parameters that are being passed in, it's self-documenting along the way. So I don't have to go back and document what this does. I can hand these templates over to my infrastructure guys and say, look, this is what I need you to do. I need you to run these 2 things, and provision all the resources, and we can test it and see how it's all going to spin up real quick. And then once things are good, we're done. My documentation steps for you on what to do is just a little script file that is going to run some command line scripts or command line prompts that are going to go provision these resources out. And you just can take a look at this stuff and see what it's going to do. You can test it, run it ahead of time. And it's all very self-documenting. So to me, as a developer, I love it because it reduces the amount of work that I have to do in documentation. But I also love it because I hate doing big deployments. They scare the hell out of me. And I hate making changes to big deployments because it's too much of a chance that something can happen.
Yeah.
You minimize and dramatically reduce that fear by making it very repeatable and very testable. And so when I can take something like this, that's one of the appeal that I have on containers and using containers for development, is that when you can remove that fear, then I'm like, we can ship right now. We can ship again right after lunch, and we can ship before we leave.
Yeah.
So it really reduces that fear.
Hey, I did a quick search for Docker, and it looks like there's lots of interesting templates. There's a Mesos cluster with Marathon and Swarm, which is from the actual Azure team themselves. What was the other one I saw? Deploying a Kibana dashboard with Docker, which is great for data visualization.
Yep.
Docker Swarm cluster. I was trying to do this by hand in Azure, crafting like a Docker Swarm using the Azure CLI and the portal, and it was a mission, very hard to, a mission as in really, really hard work.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I should have definitely done it with a template.
It really does simplify stuff. I mean, you see some of the ones that are out there. I mean, I see, for the Docker ones, we had the ones you mentioned. You've got one for Docker Swarm cluster, deploy a WordPress blog with Docker, deploy an Ubuntu VM, running Neki wallet name API server. I mean, it's really cool.
Yeah. Provision
a Docker ready Windows Server container preview host.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that you want to go play with the stuff that's there for the Windows container support. You can just use this template to spin it up, and now we're good to go. I mean, granted, I know someone's going to say, yeah, but I can do all this stuff using the web interface and the portal. I totally agree. But now my set of instructions for you to go get this stuff up and running is, instead of giving you this lab and all these screenshots of how to go run this stuff, I can just say, open a command prompt, whether you're on Windows or OS X or Linux, it doesn't matter. Open a command prompt and go run these 2 commands. And once you've done that, you're good. And then go check out the stuff that went ahead and got provisioned. And when you're done with it, run this other command and it deletes everything, so you don't have to worry about cleaning up and having runaway costs.
Yeah, for sure. That's nice. I like it. I like that there's lots of templates already available for different things.
Yeah.
I'm going to try this out for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool stuff. So I guess the big takeaway for people is that, if you're a developer, you're infrastructure person working with Azure, you definitely want to be familiar with what these ARM templates are. This is definitely the way forward for provisioning stuff in Azure. The Azure documentation the documentation on the Azure site is pretty strongly biased on saying that don't use ASM, use ARM. ASM is only there for backwards compatibility.
Yeah. We're
not doing anything there. ARM is where the future is. That's where we're going. So, and I mean, when you even talk about some of these the Azure Container Service that's in preview right now, they have, when they go to set this stuff up for you, they're using ARM templates to set it all up for you.
Yeah.
And it's going to be even easier because some of these templates can be really, really complicated. And by them giving us a lot of the core pieces of those templates where we just plug in some parameters, makes it so much easier.
Do you know if it's possible to, if you've gone through and handcrafted a whole lot of infrastructure in the Azure portal today, whether you can reverse engineer that out to a template? So
you definitely can. But what I don't know is if it's a simple, one-click kind of a thing.
Right. So I was thinking, you spend a bunch of time setting up through the portal, setting up your various networks and machines and storage accounts and bits and pieces. And you kind of use it as a rapid prototyping tool. Use the portal to get to a template quicker than, handcrafting it or trying to modify an existing one. So, it'd be nice to be able to reverse engineer your existing infrastructure into a template.
Yeah, actually, good news here. When you just asked that, I just did a quick little search for creating an ARM template from an existing resource group, because all this stuff, when you deploy this stuff, it's all going to get deployed into a resource group in Azure.
Yeah.
When I did that search, it didn't take too long to find a hit on the user voice for Azure. That is a request for the ability to export a resource group as a template that was submitted on March the 3rd, 2015. It's got 543 votes. And as of January the 13th, 2016, Microsoft has responded with, this is very interesting. We're hearing from a lot of customers to ask this. By the way, we started development.
Nice.
Yeah. So Microsoft is saying that it's coming. Let's see. They say this is very interesting and something we're hearing from many customers. It's a complex problem. We want to make sure we solve the problem the correct way. One question is, your concern primarily with the state of the topology of the resources, i.e. the template representation of the resource group, or the runtime state of the resources themselves, i.e. web deploy package capturing the files for running web server, for VHD or running VM. By the way, we started this. Then there's a whole discussion on it right now. So oh wow, there's a long comment history too. It's a good thing. I'll go ahead and I'll add this to our Flipboard so people can take a look at this if they're interested. But
very cool.
It's definitely a cool way to provision resources.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to go take a look at it and some of the templates on the sort of the marketplace of templates there, and go try provisioning some Docker Swarm stuff, I think. That's
exactly that one, and the Kibana one for the Elasticsearch stuff or the elk stack. I wanted to go through and set those things up, and then I was like, how would you actually set this up with Docker and this and this and this? And it's like someone's already gone ahead and done it. So I'm like, oh well, let me just spin that up and let me kick the tires without having to go through the pain of step-by-step setup.
Yeah. I think this is what Tutum, or now Docker Cloud, does behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Because they use ARM to deploy your nodes, so they can go create new nodes in Azure for you and get them all configured. And I believe this is the way they're doing it. So, yes, definitely very cool.
Yeah. And I wish that we had these kind of APIs for something like Office 365 to go through and manage the provisioning of certain things and provisioning of seats to licenses to users and their mailbox settings and all that stuff. But
yep. templatizing. Configuration as code.
Mm-hmm.
It's so now you can go stick this in your source control and make changes to it and commits and fork it and comment on changes and all that sort of stuff, and know that you've got a nice history of your infrastructure in a configuration file.
Yep. Pretty cool stuff.
Rad.
Cool. Well, that's all I had to. I just wanted to whet people's appetite for what ARM was and explain it. I've heard a bunch of people talk about it, and to me, it was always, okay, I know I should be paying attention to it. I know it's templated, but give me an example of how this is actually going to be useful to me. So hopefully walking through that little example with you. If you're listening to this in the car, I don't recommend you pull out your laptop while you're doing this to try and, I guess I should have said this before we did the template, but, grab the episode and listen to it when you're sitting at your desk and walk through the same thing I walk CJ through. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, if I can do it, so can you. No, I'm kidding.
That's what I was thinking. I mean, you can provision some Azure resources in a resource group so much easier than recording a podcast. How's that?
There you go. Excellent. All right, well, thanks, AC.
Absolutely, man. Have a good week.
You too. Catch up.
If you have a question for us, go to microsoftcloudshow.com/questions, where you can submit it as text or record it as a WAV or an MP3 file and provide a link so that we can play your question on the show. Our theme music is an excerpt from Evaporated Eric by Monk Turner, used under Creative Commons. You can subscribe to us in iTunes by searching for the Microsoft Cloud Show or via RSS at microsoftcloudshow.com, where you'll also find a full transcript and show notes of each episode. You can find us on Facebook searching for the Microsoft Cloud Show or on Twitter at MS Cloud Show. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.